The 1995 New Jersey Devils won the Stanley Cup while being outshot in 16 of their 20 playoff games. Welcome to the bizarre world of NHL paradoxes. Today we're breaking down every mind-bending contradiction in hockey history. By the end, you'll never watch hockey the same way. Let's start with paradox number 16, the Instigator Rule that was supposed to reduce fighting but actually increased it. Back in 1992, the NHL introduced the instigator penalty to discourage players from starting fights. The idea was simple: give an extra 2 minutes to whoever throws the first punch and fights would drop. But here's where it gets weird. Fighting actually went up after the rule came in. The numbers don't lie. In the 5 years before the Instigator Rule, the NHL averaged 0.63 fights per game. In the 5 years after, that jumped to 0.72 fights per game. Why did a rule designed to stop fighting create more of it? Teams realized they needed dedicated enforcers more than ever. Since skilled players couldn't defend themselves without taking an extra penalty, teams loaded up on tough guys whose only job was to fight. The Instigator Rule created an arms race of enforcers, leading to more staged fights between heavyweights who barely played hockey. This changed the entire culture of the sport. Instead of organic fights between regular players, we got a boxing sideshow that interrupted the actual game. The NHL finally started phasing out enforcers in the 2000s and 10s, but it took over 20 years to undo what the Instigator Rule created. Speaking of rules that backfired, paradox number 15 is the two-line pass rule that was meant to speed up the game but slowed it down instead. For those who don't remember, from 1943 to 2005, you couldn't pass the puck across two lines. The NHL thought this would create more action in the neutral zone and prevent cherry-picking. But teams found a way to exploit it. The trap defense was born. Teams like the Devils would clog up the neutral zone with all 5 players, making it impossible to advance the puck with speed. Games turned into chess matches with constant whistles for two-line passes. Scoring plummeted to historic lows. In 2003-04, the season before they finally killed this rule, teams averaged just 2.57 goals per game, the lowest since the 1950s. The moment they eliminated the two-line pass in 2005, scoring jumped 15% overnight. Teams could stretch the ice again. The trap became less effective. Speed and skill mattered more than defensive systems. The NHL spent 62 years with a rule that achieved the exact opposite of its purpose. But if you think that rule was backwards, paradox number 14 will blow your mind. This is the goalie equipment paradox, where bigger pads actually led to more goals. In the 1990s, goalies started wearing massive equipment for safety. Shoulder pads ballooned. Leg pads went from 10 inches wide to 12 inches. Catching gloves looked like pizza boxes. By 2005, some goalies looked more like sumo wrestlers than athletes. You'd think bigger equipment equals fewer goals, right? Wrong. Here's what actually happened. The huge gear made goalies slower and less flexible. They couldn't move laterally as well. They couldn't drop into the butterfly as quickly. Most importantly, they couldn't track pucks through traffic because their own equipment blocked their vision. The stats back this up. Save percentages didn't improve as much as expected during the big equipment era. When the NHL started shrinking goalie gear in 2005, then again in 2016 and 2018, save percentages went up each time. Smaller, more athletic goalies could actually stop more pucks than the oversized versions. Today's goalies wear equipment that's 40% smaller than the peak era, yet they're posting better numbers than ever. Now for paradox number 13, the overtime loss point that rewards teams for failing. Since 1999, teams get a point in the standings for losing in overtime or a shootout. This created one of hockey's weirdest situations. Some games are worth 3 total points, while others are worth only 2. The math here is insane. If you play 10 games and go 5-5 in regulation, you get 10 points. But if you go 0-0 to 10, losing every game in overtime, you still get 10 points. You literally get the same reward for never winning as you do for winning half your games. This completely breaks competitive balance. Teams figured out the loophole immediately. Late in tied games, both teams often play super conservative hockey. They'd rather guarantee 1 point and gamble for 2 in overtime than risk getting 0. Analytics show teams take 23% fewer shots in the last 5 minutes of tied games compared to when they're down by 1. The system designed to create more exciting finishes actually created boring hockey. Several leagues use better systems. The PWHL gives 3 points for a regulation win, 2 for an overtime win, and 1 for an overtime loss. Every game is worth the same total. But the NHL refuses to change, creating a standing system where losing can be just as valuable as winning. Paradox number 12 brings us to the Enforcer Paradox, where the worst fighters were protecting the best players. This might sound crazy, but hear me out. The whole point of enforcers was to protect skilled players from dirty hits. If someone took a run at Wayne Gretzky, Dave Semenko would make them pay. But enforcers were usually terrible at actually fighting. The data is hilarious. Most enforcers lost more fights than they won. They'd square off against other enforcers in staged bouts that had nothing to do with protecting anyone. Meanwhile, the players who actually needed protection, the superstars, rarely saw any benefit. Studies show that having an enforcer on your team didn't reduce the number of hits your skill players took. It didn't reduce injuries. It didn't even reduce penalties against your team. What enforcers actually did was take up a roster spot that could go to someone who could play hockey. Teams with dedicated enforcers scored fewer goals and allowed more. They won fewer games. The Edmonton Oilers of the 1980s didn't win because of Dave Semenko. They won because they had Gretzky, Messier, Curry, and Coffey. The enforcer era was hockey's longest-running placebo effect. This connects directly to paradox number 11, the plus-minus paradox, where the best players often have negative ratings. Plus-minus is supposed to measure defensive responsibility. You get a plus when your team scores at even strength, a minus when they get scored on. Simple, right? Except it's completely broken. Here's why this stat makes no sense. A player's plus-minus depends more on their teammates and goalie than their own play. You could dominate possession, create chances, and play perfect defense, but if your goalie lets in a soft goal, you get a minus. Conversely, you could be terrible but play with great players and look like a defensive superstar. The examples are everywhere. Erik Karlsson won the Norris Trophy as the league's best defenseman in 2012 with a minus 16 rating. Connor McDavid, the best player in hockey, has had multiple negative plus-minus seasons. Meanwhile, fourth-liners on good teams routinely post positive ratings despite being replacement-level players. Plus-minus tells you more about team strength than individual performance, yet broadcasters still cite it like it means something. Moving to paradox number 10, we have the Powerplay Paradox, where having more players can be a disadvantage. This sounds insane, but modern NHL teams sometimes struggle more on the power play than at even strength. The numbers are staggering. In 2023-24, 12 teams had a better goals per 60 minutes rate at 5-on-5 than on the power play. How is this possible? When you're on the power play, the other team knows exactly what you're trying to do. They can play a passive box or diamond formation and just block shots. They don't have to worry about odd man rushes. They can ice the puck without penalty. Meanwhile, the power play team often gets too cute, passing up good shots while hunting for the perfect play. The pressure makes it worse. Fans expect goals on the power play. When it doesn't happen, players grip their sticks tighter. They overthink. They make mistakes. Some teams are so bad at power plays that opponents actually prefer taking penalties late in games to kill clock. That's how you know a fundamental advantage has become a paradox. But here's paradox number 9 that might be even stranger. The empty net paradox, where pulling your goalie at the wrong time helps you more than pulling at the right time. Coaches traditionally pull their goalie with about 90 seconds left when down by 1. But mathematicians have proven the optimal time is actually around 6 minutes and 10 seconds remaining. The math is bulletproof. When you pull at 90 seconds, you have about an 11% chance of tying the game. Pull at 6 minutes, and it jumps to 19%. That's nearly double the odds. Yet no NHL coach does it. Why? Because if you pull at 6 minutes and give up an empty netter, you look like an idiot on TV. If you pull at 90 seconds and lose, nobody questions it. This is pure loss aversion. Coaches would rather lose conventionally than win unconventionally. They're costing their teams multiple wins per season because they're scared of criticism. Patrick Waugh is the only coach who consistently pulls early, around 3 minutes, and even he won't go full optimal. The data says teams should pull even earlier when down by 2, sometimes with 10 minutes left, but that will never happen. Speaking of data that coaches ignore, paradox number 8 is about how teams that are winning actually get dominated in shot metrics. When a team takes a lead, especially in the third period, they get heavily outshot. We're talking 65 to 35% shot shares sometimes. You'd think the losing team caught fire, right? Actually, no. The team with the lead is doing this on purpose. They fall back into a defensive shell, giving up low-danger shots from the outside while protecting the middle of the ice. They're trading quantity for quality. The trailing team fires everything at the net, hoping for a lucky bounce. The leading team blocks shots and clears rebounds. Here's the fascinating part. The team getting outshot usually increases their chance of winning. Their shooting percentage goes up because they only take high-danger chances on counterattacks. Their save percentage goes up because they're giving up garbage shots. The score effects are so strong that analysts have to adjust for them. Raw shot metrics without score adjustment are basically meaningless. If you're enjoying these mind-bending stats, hit subscribe. I'm posting frequent breakdowns of the weirdest parts of hockey that nobody talks about. Now let's dive into paradox number 7, which might be the most controversial one yet. This is the Gretzky Paradox, where the greatest passer in history succeeded by being selfish with the puck. Wayne Gretzky has more assists than any other player has total points. He's the ultimate playmaker. But here's the secret. Gretzky held on to the puck longer than almost any superstar in history. Watch old Gretzky footage, and you'll see something interesting. He'd circle behind the net for 5, 6, 7 seconds. He'd hold the puck on the half wall until defensemen got dizzy. He'd wait and wait and wait until the perfect pass opened up. Other players would have shot or dumped it in. Gretzky was selfish in the best way possible. The numbers prove it. Gretzky averaged over 25 seconds of puck possession per game in his prime. That's double what most first-line centers get today. He'd rather kill an entire power play holding the puck than make a mediocre pass. His teammates learned to just get open and wait. Eventually, the puck would arrive on their tape for a tap-in. Gretzky got the assist, they got the goal, everyone won. This strategy only worked because Gretzky had supernatural vision and passing ability. When average players try to hold the puck that long, they turn it over. But it shows how the best passer ever created assists by not passing until the perfect moment. Paradox number 6 takes us to the Stanley Cup Paradox, where the trophy is actually older than the league that awards it. Lord Stanley donated the cup in 1892 as a challenge trophy for Canada's best amateur team. The NHL didn't exist until 1917. For 25 years, the Stanley Cup had nothing to do with the NHL. This creates all sorts of weird situations. The Montreal AAAs won the first Stanley Cup, but they're not an NHL team. The Seattle Metropolitans won it in 1917, but the NHL doesn't count that in their records. When you see teams listed as 24-time Stanley Cup champions, they're counting wins from before the NHL existed. It would be like the NFL counting championships from random semi-pro leagues in the 1890s. Moving to paradox number 5, we have the original 6 paradox, which is that there were way more than 6 original NHL teams. The original 6 refers to the period from 1942 to 1967 when the league had 6 teams: Toronto, Montreal, Boston, New York Rangers, Detroit, and Chicago. But none of these were the original teams. The NHL started in 1917 with 4 teams: Montreal Canadiens, Montreal Wanderers, Ottawa Senators, and Toronto Arenas. None of these except the Canadiens were part of the original 6. By 1926, the NHL had 10 teams, including the Pittsburgh Pirates, Philadelphia Quakers, and Montreal Maroons. The league downsized during the Great Depression and World War II, landing at 6 teams almost by accident. Calling them the original 6 is pure marketing mythology. It makes that era sound planned and historic when it was really just the NHL barely surviving. 5 of the 6 teams were controlled by just 2 ownership groups who ran it like a cartel. They split profits and kept player salaries artificially low. The original 6 wasn't hockey's golden age, it was a monopoly that held the sport back for 25 years. But paradox number 4 shows how the expansion era that everyone mocked actually saved hockey. When the NHL expanded from 6 to 12 teams in 1967, purists said it would dilute the talent and ruin the game. The exact opposite happened. Expansion made hockey better in every measurable way. Before expansion, the same few teams won everything. Montreal and Toronto combined for 22 of 25 championships from 1942 to 1967. Most players never got a real chance because teams controlled their rights forever. Hundreds of talented players were stuck in the minor leagues because there were only 120 NHL jobs. The sport was dying outside of 6 cities. After expansion, everything changed. Scoring went up because defensive systems hadn't caught up to the bigger ice surfaces in new arenas. More teams meant more chances for players to develop. Cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis became hockey hotbeds. Youth participation exploded. TV revenue grew exponentially. What looked like dilution was actually multiplication. The NHL needed expansion to become a real major league, not a regional curiosity. Paradox number 3 brings us to something really counterintuitive, the fighting paradox, where less fighting actually led to more concussions. As the NHL cracked down on fighting through the 2000s and 2010s, dropping from 0.6 fights per game to 0.15 today, everyone expected player safety to improve. Instead, concussions went up. The mechanism is subtle but makes sense. When fighting was common, players policed themselves. Take a dirty hit at someone, and you'd have to answer for it. That threat kept players honest. They'd think twice before throwing a blindside check. Once fighting disappeared, the rats came out to play. Players throw dangerous hits knowing the worst consequence is a 2-minute penalty. The data is striking. Concussion rates rose 50% as fighting rates dropped 75%. Now, correlation doesn't equal causation, and factors like better diagnosis and increased awareness play a role. But multiple studies found that teams with more fights had fewer player games lost to injury. The threat of punishment mattered more than the actual fights. It's the hockey equivalent of nuclear deterrence. Paradox number 2 is the analytics paradox, where advanced stats sometimes disagree with what actually wins games. The analytics movement revolutionized hockey in the 2010s. Teams started tracking shot attempts, zone entries, and expected goals. Smart teams built rosters around possession metrics. Then something weird happened. Teams that dominated fancy stats kept losing to teams that didn't. The 2012 LA Kings had mediocre possession numbers, but won the Stanley Cup. The 2019 St. Louis Blues ranked 16th in expected goals percentage and won it all. Meanwhile, teams like the 2010s Los Angeles Kings under Daryl Sutter dominated possession metrics but couldn't score enough to win consistently. The disconnect drove analysts crazy. Here's what was happening. Analytics measure processes, not results. Having more shot attempts is generally good, but not if they're all from bad angles. Controlling play is nice, but not if you can't finish. The best teams learned to blend analytics with traditional hockey sense. They'd sacrifice possession for quality chances. They'd play different styles based on game state. Pure analytics teams were too predictable. Finally, paradox number 1 is the salary cap paradox, where parity actually created dynasties. When the NHL introduced the salary cap in 2005, the goal was to spread talent around and prevent rich teams from buying championships. No more Colorado Avalanche or Detroit Red Wings super teams. Every team would have a chance. Instead, the cap era has produced more repeat champions than ever. The Chicago Blackhawks won 3 cups in 6 years. The Pittsburgh Penguins went back-to-back. The Tampa Bay Lightning won consecutive championships and made 3 straight finals. The Colorado Avalanche built a powerhouse. How did the system designed to prevent dynasties create more of them? Smart teams figured out how to manipulate the cap better than others. They'd sign players to front-loaded deals. They'd weaponize LTIR to exceed the cap in the playoffs. They'd tank strategically to draft generational talents on cheap entry-level contracts. The cap didn't create parity, it created a new game where the smartest front offices dominate. Teams that understand the CBA loopholes build dynasties while others spin their wheels. This brings us to hockey's ultimate paradox. The most chaotic sport with the most random bounces somehow has the most predictable playoffs. The best regular season team wins the Stanley Cup more often in hockey than in any other major sport. Despite all the randomness, despite all these paradoxes, cream rises to the top when it matters most.